Hello, my name is Jake Taylor. I am here to give my presentation on Where the Water Goes. This book um, is a great read. David Owen talks about the water allocation and laws and history along the whole entire Colorado River, starting from the upper basin to down to the lower basin, down to the delta, where the river goes into Mexico. Now, he starts the book at the upper basin, talking about the amounts of water, rain, snow pack in the upper basin, where the water is allocated up there. Um, he focuses on a narrative of him traveling along the Colorado River until he reaches the lower basin. So in the second chapter, he talks about the law of the river, which is a complex body of laws, court cases, and regulations that control use of Colorado River water and the operation of its dams. So in the 1800s, states diverted water from the Colorado River and its tributaries without restrictions. As the diversions increased, a long battle over apportionment evolved. So today, the Colorado River is probably the most controlled, controversial, and litigated river in the world. Now you can see here on the right, move this real quick. You can see here on the right, kind of the portions. This is actually relatively recently. I believe this is around 2010. The percentage of water that's allocated to different states, even I guess Mexico as well, so different countries. However, the law of the river was established early in the 1900s. This was done, however, in a very, very wet season, past few years that they had at the time. And so the way they allocated the river water was based on the amount they had and the amount that was used by the different states. However, it's a little bit skewed, and they didn't realize this at the time, that they wouldn't have as much water as they thought they would because there were very, very wet years that this took place. So around this time, I guess a little bit later in the 1900s, obviously, President Hoover was the one that pushed the Hoover Dam. We had the start of many hydroelectric dams along the Colorado River. So you can see here on the right, Glen Canyon Dam and right at the end of Lake Powell, and then the Hoover Dam, and there's the Parker Dam, there's many other dams along the Colorado River that not only allocated more amounts of water for these cities nearby and states and counties near these locations, but this really allowed for electricity to be produced in great amounts. Obviously, we know that hydroelectricity is one of the largest sources of renewable energy in the country. And so this was a great opportunity for them to allocate not only water, but electricity to these nearby areas. Now, the Grand Valley, this is something that Owens talks about. Obviously, you can see it's kind of in the western side near Grand Junction of Colorado, is mostly farmland and water. Conservation is a very hot topic here in the Grand Valley. This area does not receive much rainfall every year, right? But it has a long farming season. So Owens discusses the implementations of improving water efficiency. Interestingly enough, it only works if plans are made to use the excess water in ways that will give back to the environment. So this is probably the biggest theme in this whole book is water conservation. And how can we not only use water in a more smart way, so use less water so that we'll have more water for the future, but how can we use it for our crops? How can we use it for in every way that we can? And so this is a very common topic that Owens talks about during his entire book. So the book then moves on to the Boulder Canyon Project, which this was very interesting. This was why we originally built the Hoover Dam. So what we saw in the lower basin, so the very end of the Colorado River here, before it goes into the Gulf, it doesn't receive much rainfall here. It's a little bit more of a desert. And so it's either very, very flooding and wet from the Colorado River just shoveling down all this water. This is before we had many dams at all or any big ones, where it was really dry. And so farmland is very, very luscious here. However, a lot of these floods would just come in and destroy all the water. And so we see that many government officials, we decided to build a number of these hydroelectric dams, especially as you can see on the left here, the Hoover Dam. So the Hoover Dam obviously was built for electricity, but also was originally built to stabilize the lower basin. So like I just said it often, it would flood down there and destroy farmland. So this is the Imperial Valley down here near the Salton Sea. And this valley obviously has much lower levels of water now. So they built the All-American Canal to bring in water, at least as much as they could, from the stabilized Colorado River lower basin into this luscious farmland. That was the point of this. So, contrary to popular belief, this is very, very intriguing. Las Vegas does not use nearly as much water as it's entitled to. So part of this is due to their water conservation laws. They have immensely, very, very good water conservation laws. So you can see here on the left with this graph that their water consumption was increasing with their, obviously, steady increase in their population. But as you can see, around 2000, in the early 2000s, they really started to implement these great conservation laws. And as their population increased, we actually saw a huge decrease in water consumption, especially into the 2010s. Now, I put an example of their mandatory watering restrictions. So you can see here it's in the winter, spring, and fall, it kind of changes. It's very, very specific. And even in the winter, when obviously Las Vegas doesn't get much water at all, any rainfall, they only allow to water once a week, depending on their group. And so this is very interesting that they're so specific with their water laws, which I'm then going to tie into Cedar City, because our water restrictions we have some, but as you can see here, our aquifer level has slowly declined in the past many years as our water consumption has slowly increased. Now, there's been much talk on water conservation, pretty much on many fronts. And so I put in a little map here of where water comes from, our basin. And as you can see, I really want to talk about something very specific, which is very similar to the Salton Sea. Now, the Salton Sea at the very end of the lower basin has no outlet. And so this is all it does is evaporate, which is very similar to the Quechapa Lake, which is just west of Cedar, as you can see here. Now, this ties in directly to the book because he talks about how they really want to use as much of this water as possible before it gets to the Salton Sea, because once it gets there, it gets contaminated with all of the chemicals and everything left behind, right? So the Quechapa Lake, obviously very similar to the Salton Sea, they're both endoheric, which means that they do not have outlets. Therefore, the water evaporates and leaves behind all of the concentrated minerals and chemicals. So we have put in much effort as a city to not only recharge the lake, so they're basically taking the water that's coming in and blowing it back in, as long as it's clean, back into aquifer, back into Coal Creek, back into irrigation of city farmland, whatever. And so this has been a huge project that we've been trying to figure out as a city, right? To use this water as best we can, just like Owens talks about in his book. Now, obviously, what is to be done, right? What can we do as a city, as a country, to conserve this water, to be better, especially with the Colorado River? So the biggest issue is the overallocation. We know that. There's too much overallocation, especially to these states that just consume all this water, like California and Nevada. With all of the bias from different states and counties, Owen's main argument is that we should view these all from a bigger picture, bigger perspective, as they all intertwine with one another. So it only from this viewpoint that we can find the solutions to the problems that we have created. Now, obviously, we've talked a lot about in class about conservation biology. I think this whole entire book is all about conservation biology, and that's why I didn't really tie it in. I don't want to really completely tie it in now. I think I've been tying it in this whole time, but this is what it's all about. It's all about conserving um, as best we can what Mother Nature has given us, whatever that is. Now, this obviously talked about water, it talked about Colorado River, but this is what it's all about. How can we um, best use what Mother Nature has given us, what water that we have? Thank you for listening. Thank you.